expanded today's session to include content that we thought that we really found relevant for right now for you as educators. And then we don't have all the answers. We want you to ask questions. We want you to share throughout today's webinar via the chat box, via the Q&A. We don't have all the answers, and we really are still gathering as much as we can from educators just like you, so that we can find the best ways to support each other. But I think we've gathered some pretty good content for right now. And remember that this is part of an educator webinar series. We started our educator webinar series back in October. Already seems like such a long time ago. And it was last year. We've covered multiple topics, and today, March 25th, we're again discussing how can schools keep undocumented students safe. If this is your first webinar that you are attending as part of this series, I want you to remember that we are providing an UndocuAlly certificate if you've participated in at least 5 of the 7 webinars. And you can complete all of the evaluations. There are evaluations that we follow up at the end, and if you complete 5 of those along with watching 5 of the 7 webinars, and then be committed to providing support for undocumented students, we will provide you with an UndocuAlly certificate. And last but not least, that I want to mention is that we have transferred our webinar series to online. So our webinar series is now visible on our website under our resources. If you go on immigrantsrising.org and go under our resources, you'll be able to easily locate our webinar series, and it's called the California High School Educator Webinar Series. In these times, if you find yourself with some extra time and you'd like to dedicate it to learning something new, you can take the time to watch the series, and that's all online. And then for today, we're going to cover a couple of different topics from, our frequently asked questions, right? What are the kinds of questions people are asking right now regarding their safety and protection in kind of like 3 areas, which is their physical health, like their physical, how am I physically safe? Health, emotional, or health, like what do I have the virus? What can I do in terms of seeking out health services for myself and my family? Or emotional health. And we're gonna be discussing that. And we have Darwin with us. We'll speak about a little bit more in a minute, and he'll go over replicable support systems to support students. They have a really great system in their organization. It's College Track. And we're going to discuss what would it look like for you to think about replicating that or something similar within your own school or your own context. In addition to that, we'll overview some resources. Again, I want to remind you that throughout the webinar, you feel free to ask questions on the chat box, and that we'll be answering throughout. So I want to start off with a key resource from Immigrants Rising for you. So we sent out this resource last week, and we gathered a lot of different kind of consolidated resources that we found would be relevant to students, to parents, to educators, people who are wanting to know how can we support undocumented students right now, or undocumented young people. It's actually not just students, it's undocumented young people. And it's so broad, and it has a lot of different content. So you're gonna want to take, some time to overview the breadth of the content that's there. I've taken some time to just write, these are the ones that I found helpful for this session. So I took 4 key resources. One of them is that we're hosting virtual wellness gatherings. So these virtual wellness gatherings happen on Sundays and Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. So today is Wednesday. So at 5 p.m., if you're feeling like it, which you might be, and even if you're not feeling like it, but you still, click the button and stay online, you can get onto a wellness gathering that's hosted by Liliana Campos. she was in our previous webinar that we had around mental health and wellness. And so she's going to be hosting, and she brings together like experts from coaches to psychologists, psychiatrists, health advocates, you know, people who are on the ground in the wellness field, and a group of allies and undocumented young people come together and benefit from this. We happen to have Rocio here with us, and she has participated in these wellness gatherings. Rocio, do you want to say a little bit about what takes place as part of this gathering?
Yes, definitely like to extend the invitation to people, because this is definitely a very unique and different space that we've created for folks, where it steps back and it steps away from sharing information, engaging with people, and connecting with people. And so we're trying to figure out what are the ways in which we can connect with people while keeping social distance. This is one of the opportunities that we have, where we actually, there are opportunities for you to engage and actually apply and take into practice some of the skills that various therapists have introduced to us and to our community, that you might continue to follow and apply during your daily life. So if you do know of any undocumented members of the community, if you yourself need a space to be able to connect with people and also do some self-care practices, this is the opportunity and a great platform for you to.
Thank you, Rocio. And I remember they mentioned that, like, that you mentioned last time, that someone brought in their little sister that was with them, right? Like they were like, hey, join me for this meditation, for this practice that we're doing. So it's a really great space that can be helpful right now. So I encourage you to attend. And we also, the other resource that I thought was really helpful was the California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance resource for undocumented people. So it also includes a pretty detailed resources in different languages, including Spanish. So I recommend taking some time to overview again what's in that guide when it comes to some of the health, what to do if somebody has symptoms of COVID-19, you know, if people are uninsured, that there are resources out there for people who don't have insurance, and making sure people realize that they can you know, go and get medical care even without insurance. So this guide has a lot of that kind of content, and I found it very useful. Another thing that's very important regarding people's safety, even in the previous webinar that we had around wellness, we discussed like fear and people sometimes carrying this fear, and it's fear that can be like informed from, you know, things that have happened from our past, right? So people, in the last couple years, we've experienced an administration that has consistently said things that really, as you know, pitted the undocumented community in a position of fear. Like very fear-induced language has been coming from our national administration. And so one of the things that came out was this issue of a public charge, that if you sought out certain resources, you would be seen as you couldn't be seen as public charge. In the case of then adjusting status, because you have this public charge on your record, it would impact your ability, your being eligible for a green card or for status, right? Well, people now are like, should I go and seek out medical care? Like, will this impact my ability to adjust status in the long run? So USCIS has posted an alert, and they clarified that testing, treatment, preventative care related to COVID-19 is not going to be determined for public charge. So even if the healthcare services are covered by Medicaid, and I've linked to the organization, National Immigration Law Center, who said that, so people can also be safe to realize, oh, I can seek out this care and it won't have a long-term impact on my potential immigration status. And then California, again, just very fortunate to be in California in so many ways. It's the only state that's extended coverage to low-income undocumented adults ages 25 and younger for the state's Medicaid program, so, or Medi-Cal. So it covers around 90,000 people. And that's also very important because, you know, parents tend to be concerned about their kids. And the young people, sometimes we're just not aware. And so for you as an educator to encourage people to, especially right now, have Medicaid, have Medi-Cal, go and apply. The offices are open. We also called to ensure that like they're still up and running, and they are, and people can go and apply and get their Medi-Cal or apply for their Medicaid. Great. Are there any questions that have been posted, Rocio? You're on mute.
Yeah, so the one other question that we've had, and we'll continue to share, is how to access the wellness gatherings. So if you visit immigrantsrising.org/wellness gatherings, you'll be able to access the information page as well as the link for you to be able to register.
Perfect. And then you've put the link on the chat box. Perfect. Great. So now we want to like kind of engage with you briefly in, well, what concerns do you have for your student safety right now? And so if you would just share with us, like, what are your personal concerns that you have right now regarding your students? And you can write them on the chat box, and then I will, okay, good. So we have like lack of technology. Yep. Funds, financial security, housing, missing jobs, stress, access to healthcare, food, accessing food, yeah. Yep. I'll wait a few more seconds just to see. Mental health, yeah. Safe homes. Yep, USCIS is closed. Unemployment. Correct. People don't have a place to study. I know that when I used to live at my mom, we grew up in a trailer park with my mom, right? And she still lives there. And yeah, I mean, where I studied was the bed or the floor, and not having a comfortable place to like be, you know, for 3 weeks, right? All right, great. And so this, if you're looking at the screen, you can kind of see the concerns that we have, from mental health to funding, financial security, you know, homes, ineligibility for funds. So you kind of get a sense of the concerns that people have. And some of these we're going to be addressing today. We're going to be addressing some of what would be like USCIS being closed and what to do with students in that area. We're going to be addressing ICE as well, and yes, like what they're doing or not, or said that they're not doing anymore due to COVID-19. We are going to be addressing access to healthcare and healthcare services. We won't be discussing too much the lack of technology or the place to study or housing on it itself. And on a lot of the resources that we've already shared with you, including Immigrants Rising resources, there is a resource for like free computers for students. So there are some organizations that, again, are like just finding ways to solve all of this. I have a trust in people, and I do find that people will find a way to solve a lot of this and really take care of the undocumented community. It's part of why we're all together, because that's the community we care about, and we're here to make sure that they're well. And so we are part of the people who will take care of this community. So thank you for all of your concerns. I think, again, we'll address some of these. We won't address them all. So it's almost like parking what we can't discuss, what we won't discuss, bringing what we can, getting as much as we can with what we can do right now. And then from there, just looking at the next step and the next step that we can take. And then I know that I got a question around protecting student data, since that is the webinar that was taking place last time. And we will discuss protecting data briefly, but it won't be the same way that it would have been discussed, given that without having the physical space of a school, even, you know, some of the content considered us having a physical space. So now, in terms of protecting student data when classrooms are virtual or people are using Google Classroom, we will discuss it briefly in the context of meeting online and kind of what we would do when we keep record of people's information and things like that. Okay, really great. So thank you all for everything that you shared around what your concerns were. I erased the concerns, but it's not like they go away, right? I just erased them here. Okay.
And we also had some other questions that were emailed, and we're not able to get to some of those questions. I know there are also some questions regarding DACA and the Supreme Court decision. So we're going to try to embed some of the responses to these questions during the webinar, and we will go ahead and do some follow-up with people, either individually with some responses to these questions, additional resources, and we're also in regarding to employment, public charge. We're also going to be having a future webinar where we're also going to be tackling some of those questions around employment as well. So we're definitely keeping record and track of your questions. So if questions continue to come up, please feel free to share them because we definitely want to be able to address.
Correct. Perfect. Yes, like as part of the series, we kind of have a pre-designed like content on the series, but there definitely will be more coming that are going to be more sessions from Immigrants Rising coming to you. So then remembering, Rocio, if you want to share on this slide, the Department of Homeland Security. Oh, you're on mute?
So as questions, yes. So as questions are coming up regarding safety, public charge, applying for renewals, ICE, enforcement, it's very important to share with you all and give you all the context of how these different agencies are connected. So we wanted to give you all the context regarding how a lot of these agencies, either interact or not interact with each other, so that you know, as information is changing, where and how to access the most up-to-date information. So to give you all the context is, there is a Department of Homeland Security which makes sure and implements a lot of the laws and the safety for keeping the states safe. Within the Department of Homeland Security, there's 3 different agencies. And so each agency focuses on different areas of what it consists of protection in the state. So there's ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, who are the ones that focus on implementing and enforcing the laws. So this is where we get to see ICE, out in the communities. There's customs and border protection, and they're the ones who get to implement a lot of the laws at the border. So they're the ones that get to see and monitor as people are coming in, out of the country. And then we have Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is a different agency where people submit their documents and go through the process, and they go through this agency to be able to process visas, family petitions, DACA. So when it comes to USCIS and ICE, it's important to recognize that they're two different agencies. They do not share, there's a level of protection of information that is implemented within USCIS to not share information with ICE. They're off with the ICE office unless there is someone who has a criminal record and they need to access that information. So as we're thinking about DACA, one of the big questions that comes up is, well, now the system, now the federal government has access to the DACA recipients. So if there's a decision that is ruled against DACA, does that mean that those who apply to DACA are going to be deported? So it's important to keep in mind how these are two different agencies. ICE and USCIS are two different agencies, and USCIS has expressed that they are going to be protecting the information of DACA recipients who apply for DACA, and that is a similar case for folks who apply for different kinds of visas or family petitions. So two different agencies, they take on a different role, and there is protection for students' information when they're applying for immigration remedies, for themselves, or family petition is a similar thing with DACA. So it's important to keep that in mind because oftentimes both agencies are used interchangeably, and there's a lot of confusion as to what it means for both of these departments. And they're both taking different actions and different measures, and they both have different websites to be able to follow what is their most up-to-date information regarding DACA renewals, which goes through USCIS, and also the efforts and where ICE is in their priorities right now, given the crisis.
Thank you, Rocio. And so now we're going to have Darwin, who's going to be sharing with us a little bit more about what they're doing in College Track, and a national organization that's doing a lot of work with undocumented students. And Darwin, just thank you so much for joining us today on a Wednesday, you know, to be with us and share your insights and a lot of the work that you've been doing to work with your students that are like high school students and more, you know, to ensure that they're taken care of.
Thank you, Stefania, for inviting me, and it's such a great pleasure to be here this afternoon. And thank you for all of the educators who joined. I was looking at the number and I'm like, fantastic. I'm really glad to see all of you joined today, and hopefully you get a lot of the answers that you've been looking for. And of course, for me, include a lot of the questions. I know we have an hour to be together, but if we don't get to your questions, I know I'll be connecting with the Immigrants Rising team to answer all of them to ensure you have your questions answered. So like Stefania said, I am the National Dreamer Coordinator at College Track, which is a national college completion program that invests in students all the way from their freshman year in high school all the way through college, independently from their immigration status. So on my end, I support our undocumented students with or without DACA across all of the 10 centers that College Track has across the country. And so I'm very lucky to be in a position where I have led College Track's support for undocumented students, and not only here in California, but also in the state of Colorado, the state of Louisiana, and this, Washington, D.C. and Maryland. And I apologize in advance for any noises that you might hear. I'm very close to BART, and I'm working from home until mid-May, so bear with me on this one. So let's go to the next slide. So today I want to start off with sharing so I'm interacting on the ground with undocumented students as we go through this crisis. And so I wanted to share with you kind of a few of the questions that I'm receiving from students themselves, but also from colleagues across the country. So about USCIS, DACA and unemployment, seeing a doctor, and of course, visiting the hospital. So let's go to the first question. Hopefully this will help. So typical questions like, are USCIS offices open? And the answer is, as of today, the USCIS field offices are not open. So these are the offices where DACA recipients would typically go in person for their biometrics appointment. And so students can visit the USCIS website, uscis.gov, for updates. But their offices will, well, on their website says right now that they're closed until April 1st. We do not know what's going to happen after that. But what is likely to happen is that for students who have pending DACA renewals, who have already submitted their paperwork or received an appointment and it's between this time frame, what is going to happen is that they're going to receive a new document from the government. So from USCIS, who, as Stefania mentioned, is the agency that processes like DACA renewals and work permits and all of that. So students do not need to do anything at this time besides checking their case if they want to on the same website. Or if things get worse, like assume they don't get a document or that USCIS offices remain open, what is going to happen is that I know there's been talks within the agency that the agency might use old fingerprints from the past 2 years because fingerprints don't change, right, from the same person. So there is that possibility, which would also make sense. And so let's go to the next question. Our CT regional attorney's office is open. So I know this is college track very specific because we have regional attorneys. However, it is very important for students to know that, to know whether their nearest attorney is open. So most likely, a lot of legal assistance organizations are partially open. What does that mean? That means that most of the paperwork is done online and most of the communication is online, but they're only, for example, for DACA recipients, they might only need to go to a service provider who's helping them with their DACA to sign documents. So that would be the only instance where law firms or legal providers will remain open. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that,
Yeah,
lawyers were seen as an essential. So remembering that a lot of the essential folks, essential practices remain open, and that lawyers were seen as that. So it makes sense that law clinics and folks that do for law are partially open or open.
Can DACA recipients access unemployment benefits? Yes, absolutely. So within the state of California, thankfully, we have we're a state that is friendly to undocumented students. But DACA recipients, as long as they meet the requirements for unemployment, they can certainly file for unemployment benefits within the state of California. Okay. Next question. Can my parents see a doctor without medical insurance? Yes, absolutely. So especially at this critical time, and I highly encourage my students to go to the CDC website to see what are the instances in which I can go to the hospital. But in generally speaking, they can go to the hospital, and I promise them that they would not be reported to ICE. I have personally, my dad, over the past 3 years before leaving to El Salvador, suffered with liver cancer. And so every time he was in terrible pain, I had to take him to the hospital. He was fully undocumented, construction worker, and he did not have health insurance. And he was never denied of access to seeing a doctor or access to care, at least in the emergency room or for any treatment. Okay. Next question. Is it safe to visit hospitals and healthcare spaces? Yes, absolutely. Just like you see here, federal regulations prevent them from accessing private information. And so most of the times, the, for federal agencies, going back to the safety question that came up, and I know this is a little bit, I'm going to try to tie these two things up. Talking about safety and how protected information is usually works, is that federal agencies will certainly need a valid warrant signed by a judge with reasonable doubt that that they need the records of this person, of XY person. So it's really hard to for government agencies to be able to obtain personal records, because they will need a warrant. And of course, for the same applies for education. So like institutions, they should not be just providing confidential information like address, legal names, and family member history to an agency that doesn't have a warrant, because that's against the law. You're essentially violating FERPA, which prevents institutions from sharing their student information. Okay, and do we have any more questions? Or do we have any questions on these sections before I move on to the next one? Okay, perfect. Let's move on to the next slide then.
Perfect.
Let me see. Actually, let me, one of the questions that came up, again, it continues to be regarding following the DACA and the Supreme Court decision.
Yes.
So right now, again, there will be a delay in the hearing of the case for DACA. So it is anticipated there will be a delay in the decision as to what's going to happen with DACA students, and folks are still being encouraged to look into financial support in order for them to renew DACA applications. And again, offices are being closed, so there's definitely, so yeah, Darwin, if there's anything you'd like to add?
Yes, and now that we're in the DACA section too, you might ask yourself, when is it an ideal time frame of when DACA recipients should be renewing? And so an ideal time frame in a normal world, it is 90 days to 6 months in advance. But we're not in a normal world, so we, especially at College Track, we are highly encouraging students to renew their DACA 1 year in advance. And the reason for that is that we just don't know what's going to happen with DACA in June. And again, this announcement is not even sure if the Supreme Court will delay its decision about DACA. And so that's why 1 year in advance is highly, highly recommended. And also reaffirm students that they will not lose their DACA status if they renew 1 year in advance. So that I get a lot of students who tell me, oh, if I renew early, I'm going to lose my DACA benefits. And that is simply a false narrative. So make sure that if you have any DACA recipients, that you do let them know that 1 year in advance is a priority. Okay, perfect. So let's go to the next section. All right, so now we're gonna talk about practices that we're doing at College Track that you can take back to your schools, or that you can start to think about, you know, for the immediate future as you help students navigate the whole school process. Okay, so at College Track, we have this term called self-directiveness. And this both applies for educators, but also for students. And what this means is we went through this whole 8-day training to learn about how to be self-directed as an individual, but also how to help you colleagues be self-directed and students. So what this means is guiding students to the resources. So meaning when students ask you a question, you're probably not gonna know all the answers, and you'll be lucky if you do. I have been in the immigration world now for like almost 7 years, and I'm still learning. And because immigration is not static, it's always changing. And so that's why you might want to ask your students, like, have you considered this resource, in order to help students also be self-directed to finding these resources on their own, so that you can also help students who really are in more urgent situations. Okay. Next slide. Cool. So I want to present to you a version of our site safety plan that we call. So I highly encourage each school to have a campus safety plan to protect students from ICE. I can reassure you that ICE, it is very unlikely that ICE will go to your school campus, but we have to prepare for the worst as educators. And the reason for having a site safety plan is to reaffirm the students a safe environment to study, learn, and grow as students. And so it is a protocol that you as teachers or school administrators should have in the event ICE comes to the site or to your school campus. So let's go to the next one. So let me give you a few examples of this. So they should know, like, they should be informed when they're opening the door, who will be the person, the number one person they should connect with in the event that ICE shows up. So assuming ICE comes through the doors of your school, not everyone will probably know how to deal with an ICE agent because typically they're very intimidating, but they're not, they're also human beings. And so your school should have a designated person to deal with this situation. So at College Track, it is the site director that is responsible for that. And maybe at your school, it could be your school principal or a counselor or a teacher that is very knowledgeable about protecting students and immigration and all of that. So I highly encourage you to start thinking about an emergency plan for your school. Okay, let's go to the next one. So I'll give you a moment to look at this slide. So like, take caution when answering the door. Just like I said, your school shouldn't be opening the doors to just anybody. I like when schools have, a sign-in sheet so that you know who's going in and out of campus. But I always like to say, like, a warrant is no access, no warrant. So if someone doesn't have a warrant, then they shouldn't have access to, especially an ICE agent, they shouldn't have access to any student information. And you're not going to get in trouble for that. A lot of, I got a lot of questions of educators like, yeah, but that's me breaking the law. You're not, because that's nothing illegal about that. What are you going to get in trouble for if they don't have a legal document that states that they have access to it? So I highly encourage, and again, we're not going to look at this in very detail today, but what we're going to do is I'm going to share it with Rocio and Stefania, and you can look at it at your own time and send us any questions you may have. All right. So let's go to the next one. Okay. So I want to give you a second to look at this other section as well. So always review the warrant, make sure you make copies, pictures, scan them so that you have a record. Okay. And there is always a possibility that there might be a fake warrant. So when you're dealing with warrants, you always want to make sure that they're signed by a judge and that they're not signed by an agent. Because if it's signed by an agent, then agents are not judges, which means it's a fake warrant. Okay, let's go to the next one. So now we're going to talk about reporter emails you. So assuming a reporter emails you to highlight a student story. So which is very likely to happen. So reporters want to highlight a story, and typically reporters are very pushy and they have a deadline, and that's the very last thing you want to do. So we do want to encourage stories for students who share their stories, but keep in mind that the student safety and legal name and protection should come first. So the reporters should keep in mind that they should not include, the student's legal name and last name, may be an alias or of the student's choosing, of course, or a fake name. And also, an anonymous, so that we would avoid the whole issue instead. So at College Track, our communications team ensures that they talk to the reporters themselves before even connecting with the students. Okay, next slide. So dreamers in social media. So I was very excited to get to this section because protecting dreamers physically protecting them is one thing, but also protecting them via social media. So what this means is that it is also our commitment to protect students via social media when promoting events. So this gets very tricky because I know we know students have access to social media, but we have to be very, very careful about how we do it. Let me give you an example so that it doesn't happen to you. So when I came to College Track about 2.5 years ago, we had an event called, we had like a Dream Summit. It was like a small conference for our high school students to come and learn about how to pay for college, meeting undocumented students in college and those that had graduated with or without DACA, to come learn about scholarships and resume building. It was a fantastic day, all good intentions. So good intentions can turn into terrible results. So one of the strategies to promote the event was, oh, we're gonna do it through social media. Sweet. Then what ended up happening was the event was promoted via social media with the exact time, with the exact location, and the time frame in which the event was going to happen. And so, and the date, of course. And so, terrible idea. And so the word got out in town that there was this event happening at this specific time, at this specific location, at this specific date. And there was a protest right in front of our centers outside, threatening to call ICE, calling racial names, and everybody was really scared inside. And so these are the type of things that good intentions can turn into bad results. And we definitely don't want anybody to experience something like this because, of course, we live in a world where not everyone welcomes immigrants and not everyone will support undocumented students. But what we can control is the way we promote events. And typically, we highly encourage educators to, if they will promote events via special invitation only, and also having a registration list that to ensure that people who are not supposed to be there are not. Okay, and next one. So in terms of deportation, so this is one of my last sections that I'm going to talk about today. So there's a lot of fear in our community that our students will be deported, that their parents will be deported, and that's a real fear that our students and families experience every single day as they go to work, as they go to school, as they're driving, even here in California. And so if you have good connections with the students and good relationships, make sure that you read this section because you never know. You may be the first person the student thinks of to call or email in a very urgent situation, such as a deportation matter. And so a student may call you with like, oh, my parents have been detained by ICE. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And you as an individual, you may not know what to do. And so these are the type of questions you want to know you want to ask the student in a particular situation like that. And if you don't remember everything I say today, just remember that who, what, when, their legal name, where have been detained, when were they detained, and any additional notes that you might you may want to write down. And remember that in these type of situations, the more information, the better, to help the attorneys taking on a case like this to help the students. Okay. And this is the final version of this one.
There's a question for you, Darwin, which was about the.
So I know that there is a lot of GoFundMe pages out there, and also a lot of organizations that are starting to some sort of funds. And so to ensure that our students have access to these type of resources, because these are very critical time during this during the coronavirus crisis. So really highly encourage educators to share those type of resources.
Perfect. And then what I'll also add is that there is a document that's going around that I actually really liked. It has relief funds that are being added. So I think maybe a lot of organizations, even ourselves, don't exactly know all there is to do to support and readjust due to this, situation where we're in a pandemic. Like, no one's gone through this before, at least unless you were around in 1918. And so it's a very new situation, and it's almost the kind of way and approach that we've got to be is like, it's about who we are for students. So like, are you going to be someone who can create a safe space for your students to come together, or and they can feel safe, or are you someone who can refer students to like a wellness gathering like the one we're hosting, and trust that they will be, that they can attend something like that? It's almost like trusting our community that we will all coordinate and get ourselves taken care of, because it's not a clear answer.
Yeah, and the one request that we do have to wrap up is, the one request that we do have is to have you all continue to send us the questions. Those of you who are on the ground getting questions from students and families, and we are going to be sharing with you all the different listservs that we recommend for you to follow for the most up-to-date information on the different information. And do stay tuned, because we are going to continue to have information sessions live in person to be able to answer questions for different audience members on the different topics that came up today.
Yes. Like, we're all, a lot of it, we're virtual for at least another 2-3 weeks. And so we're looking for more content like this. And then, your students, somebody mentioned something to me, because I was telling them about how I felt about undocumented people right now. And I have to remember, sometimes I have to remember, like, we are talking about people who risked their entire lives to leave their own country, come to a whole new country. Did things that I don't know that I would have done it. My family crossed when I was 6. I was just, hanging out with my mom or whomever, like, I was just hanging out, compared to like the choice. So we're talking about really powerful people when we're talking about undocumented people. And that is so important to remember. We're talking about people who are strong and are powerful inside of this vulnerability. Yes, vulnerable, yes, less resources, but we're not talking about people who are, who we wanna be like, oh my God, like, poor of you, it's like, how can we create a space that you're taken care of, and let's move forward together. But we are really talking about really powerful people when we're talking about undocumented people. And that is something that is so important for us to remember. My favorite professor would always say, you all, he treated us like this, like you all are college students on a high school campus, and he treated us all the same. That was my favorite professor. So for educators, lastly, for your students to be safe, treat them all really well. We're gonna be jumping off now, just so that we can wrap up. And we thank you all, for those of you who came back even with our technical difficulties. I'm gonna merge the recording from what we had before and this one, so it kind of looks like it's merging. Send us emails, send us your questions. We will be developing new content as needed. Darwin, I appreciate you. Thank you. And thank you, Rocio.
Thank you all.
Of course, and hopefully next time we can do one whole live session with educators to answer all the questions out there. So I'm definitely available to all of you.
Okay, thank you, Darwin. We'll keep that in mind. All right, bye.